Okay, so the project I'm working on, it's called the surrender equation. The reason I use the word surrender is because when you look at religion, it's all basically about surrender. Whether you're talking about Buddhism, Taoism, the Baha'i Faith, Hinduism, Christianity, Islam, if you think of a Buddhist meditating, he's basically surrendering the self through meditation. If you think of a Hindu doing yoga through posture and pranayama, through breath, they're basically also going so deep within that they would be surrendering or letting go of the self. Christianity, if you think of Jesus hanging on the cross, that would be a form of surrender. And Islam, it actually means to submit or to surrender. So now with quantum physics, it's interesting when you have the double slit experiment, they're firing particles, and when somebody's watching, observing, or it's being recorded, um, it's a density and it's a particle. But when nobody's measuring it or quantifying it or judging it, it's a wave. It transcends time and space. Possibly touching on properties that are eternal, infinite, and timeless. And the importance of that is anything that's eternal, infinite, or timeless, it can't be quantified. It can't be counted and measured. Um, so now, really quickly, here's the yin yang symbol. Now, the reason I have that here is because they've actually, quantum physics, they've entangled two particles. And when they entangle the two particles, it actually looks like the yin yang symbol. So instead of considering these two particles like two small particles, go to the largest extreme and imagine the one side is God and the other side is you. And when you think of religiously speaking, like the Father, Son, Alpha, Omega, beginning and the end, imagine instead of two particles entangling themselves, imagine a person entangles himself with the universe. And that's where you get into your, Messiah, prophets, gurus. If you're talking in movies, theatrically speaking, you're talking like a Neo from the Matrix, a Jedi, Doctor Strange is master of the mystical arts, and this is a lot about mysticism. Okay, so really quickly, in the beginning, religiously speaking, they said there was God, only God, omnipotent, omnipresent. Um, Now, I've said to people, especially religious people, I'm like, what did God make everything out of? And people say, oh, it's God. He can make it out of anything. But my point is, there's no such thing as anything. There's no anything and there's nothing. There's only God or this energy that permeates everywhere. So the only thing he could have made us out of is his energy. Okay. So in the beginning up here, if you look at this diagram, in the beginning, it's blank. So it's all God, only God. And then he creates everything. So you have the universe, all the planets, stars, and even into us. If you imagine there's 2 points there, me and you being born. So everything is part of this energy, including our physical anatomy, the whole universe, space, everything. The only thing that's separate from it is our free will, which is basically our choice and our thought. So the reason I say this is because in the beginning, if there was only God, and if you imagine the will of God, how do you have free will? The only way you have free will is if the universe or God surrendered some of his will so that you have will. Now, the highest choice a human can make, therefore, is surrendering that will back. So I'm going to use two quotes here right now. The one is biblically, it's be still and know that I am. I would be God. And if you think more quantum physics or scientifically, to the mind that is still, the whole universe surrenders. Okay. So right now I'm basically measuring, I'm quantifying, I have my thought and I have my ego. If I went so deep within that I touched on that very deep silence or stillness, um, it would basically be, there's a term, people talk about letting go or awakening or so forth, but it's called dying within. So right now, if I was to physically die, my relationship with time would end. So now imagine going spiritually so deep within that you die within, your relationship with time would also end. So that relates to the quantum physics, because when you go so deep into the physics, um, when it's not being measured or quantified, so you imagine that stillness or silence, then that particle goes from a density to a wave, and that wave transcends time and space. So what I want to talk about is, I don't think that we live in a material universe. So people think there's the Big Bang and you have, hydrogen and rocks and heat and it forms, all these planets and life. And then we have thought and consciousness and emotion and we have all these things. I can't see consciousness coming out of basically a rock or an explosion. The universe would have to possess consciousness for us to have consciousness. So now imagine that this is a conscious universe, and out of the consciousness comes the material world. So for example, if I have a dream right now, the second my dream starts, first of all, it doesn't take 13.8 billion years for my dream to form. The second my dream forms, I have a whole universe that I've created instantaneously. On top of creating a universe, I've created solid matter, because within my dream I'd be sitting in a chair, there's a floor, there's a building. So I've created a whole universe instantaneously. I've created solid matter. I've created time. If there's people in my dream, like you, for instance, I've also created life, and I have myself. The problem is that I'm first person in my dream. So I'm not aware in a normal dream, take away like astral travel or lucid dreaming or whatever. I'm not aware that I'm sleeping and that I exist outside of the dream. I'm only aware of my character. So now what I'm saying is, imagine that this whole universe was God's dream. So quantum physics is saying that every atom in the universe is conscious and it's being observed. Well, how would it be conscious? It's conscious because if this was my dream right now, the entire dream, me, you, the wall, the building, the sky, even this empty space is all my dream. So it's all going to be my consciousness. So now imagine the whole universe is conscious. Well, just go from micro to macro and imagine that this is God's dream or the universe's dream. And if I, as a product of the universe, am capable of having a dream and having consciousness, then I would have to believe that the source of this universe would also possibly possess consciousness. So if you look at this as the Big Bang, and then it explodes, and we have all our planets and everything forming, and then you have the world we live in, we have all our religions, we have philosophy, science, psychology, math, history, we have our secret societies, binary code, and we have all of this. The problem is right now is that the world's broken. I'm not going to go too in depth with that. I think we can look at it through poverty and war, even insecurity, doubt, a lot of the mental health issues, depression, anxiety, all the things going on, the destruction of the planet. Anyway, you can go on and on. The greed and the corruption is actually probably the biggest thing right now. So the world's broken. Now, there's a story or a prophecy of somebody who's going to come and save the entire world. Now, for that to happen, that person would be, they talk about a Messiah or an Avatar or the Maitreya. What that person would have to do is create a singularity. So they would have to take everything, all time, all space, all religion, all philosophy, all math, all history, everything, and collapse it down to a single point. Now, if you did that physically, we'd all be crushed and the universe would obviously be destroyed. So you would actually do it consciously. And the only way you can do it consciously is if we're part of a conscious universe. So I'll give a quick story. Years ago, my friend told me that if you can see your hands in your dream, that you can control your dream. So for like 6 months, my friends were all trying to dream about our hands. You can't really project a dream, so it wasn't happening. But 6 months to a year later, I was walking in a dream and my hands were shaking, swinging, and I actually saw my hands. And in my dream, I acknowledged it. I put my hands behind my back. I looked at them again, and I said, okay, I should be able to control my dream. I basically woke up in my dream, and anything that I wanted to happen, I basically was able to manifest. The very first thing I wanted to do actually was, I love hockey. I wanted to win the Stanley Cup with the Leafs. So I wanted to play hockey. The reason I know I was awake, though, is because from within my dream, I was asking myself, what time is it outside of my dream? Basically, is it 4 o'clock in the morning and I have time to fulfill this dream and play in the Stanley Cup playoffs and get to the finals and so forth? Or is it 7:29 and my alarm's about to go off and I'm going to be woken up? So because I didn't know how much time I had, I needed it to happen right away. So I just picked something random and I basically manifested it happen within my dream. The key is, though, is when I woke up, what I realized is our dreams are all energy, and we're all energy, and this whole universe is energy, and possibly the same energy. So if you can wake up in your dream, then why can't you wake up in this world? And that's basically when we talk about enlightenment or consciousness or tapping in, that's basically the experience. The thing is, though, it's that it's not a projection of your thought and your beliefs, because that's all quantified, measured energy. It's experienced through silence. So I'll give you an example. If this right now is God or the eternal now, that's the eternal now. It takes you time to hear that. It takes you time to see that. And then it takes you time to react, whether it's emotionally or intellectually. So there's the eternal now, and there's you within your dimension of time. That's kind of what this picture is here, where you see the infinite spliced and you see us moving linearly through time. And as we get deeper and deeper into our life, we basically lose our relationship to the infinite or the eternal, and we just kind of start moving through time. Now, it's interesting because the word individual, we think it's an individual, like we're separate. I'm an individual, you're an individual, that makes us separate. If you take the word individual, the root of the word individual, it's indivisible, which means that we can't be separated. So there's your individual self in the physical sense, but then there's your individual self in more the infinite sense, and that's beyond the division and the separation. Okay, so the key to this is that it's all about consciousness. So whether you're looking at, say, Plato's cave simile, everyone's in the cave, you're all in the shadows, you're all in the darkness, nobody's ever seen the light. They take you or they pull one of us out into the light. At that point, coming out of the cave, you would become conscious. Okay, when you take the Adam and Eve story, it's actually the reverse. They were in paradise and then they became conscious of themselves and they became conscious of the separation. And there's that. With quantum physics, you have the particle and the wave. If it's being measured or quantified, you have a particle, it's a density, and it exists within time and space. When it's not being measured or quantified or judged, it's a wave. It defies our laws of physics, and you're talking about things that are eternal, infinite, and timeless, meaning they can't be quantified. This picture up here, it's another word for God. It's called Ein Sof, and it means nothingness without end. So imagine you have heaven and earth. You have your yin yang symbol, the light, the dark, or the white, the black. You have your particle and your wave. You have your cave and coming out of the cave. It's basically all duality, even with binary code. You have your 0 and 1. If you imagine God being the 0 and we're all the 1, and that's basically the program. When you die, you would basically revert back to the 0. But the key is if you die, you go back to God and the universe. But if you die within spiritually, if you touch on that silence, and it's not all religious and spiritual, it's also quantum physics, because if you touch on that silence, you're no longer quantifying. You don't physically die. It's not you going back to the universe. It's the universe or the God coming into you. So if you imagine that you're a vessel, because you are a property of the universe, and if it's all one energy and one consciousness, the only thing separate being my thought and my ego, my choice, my free will. If I surrender that, if I basically take my ego, that density that is me, my identity, and I pull it out, there's an empty space, and that space has to be filled. But remember, the initial explanation is that the only energy in the universe is God. It's consciousness. So if I get rid of my ego, then it would be filled with consciousness. So if you look at somebody like Christ, he's Jesus, and then when he becomes enlightened, he becomes Christ. Christ isn't his last name. It means anointed one, like Siddhartha Buddha, which means awakened one. But basically from Jesus to Christ, he would go from just regular talking to speaking the word of God. So imagine at that point, somebody would become a vessel for the universe or for the divine, and it would basically filter through. I think it's pretty good. So the last thing is the mirror analogy. So because we're looking through the filter of time, like when I was saying, if this is the eternal now, and it takes me time to see it or hear it and then react emotionally or intellectually. So there's the eternal now, and then there's me or you existing within our dimension of time. It's almost the equivalent of looking in a mirror. So if I'm looking in a mirror, everything I see is real. But the problem is because it's a reflection, I'm seeing the opposite. So if I was to lift my right arm, it should be my right arm that's lifting in the mirror, but it's actually reflection. So it's going to be the opposite. And that's basically it, is because we're seeing it through the filter of time. And again, we think of time being like past, present, and future, and it's a linear line. Think of it more like a triangle where you have past, present, and future. And then basically the eternal now is in the middle. That's kind of like your Pink Floyd symbol. So basically when you die, your relationship with time ends. If you die within spiritually, your relationship with time would also end. And then one of us would basically end time. So when you think biblically, when they talk about the end of days, don't think of the end of the world and we're all going to die and the world's going to implode. Think of end of days being the plural, so the S. So for end of days, imagine it becomes one day. Okay, it's not one day for you. It would be one day for one person. And so imagine you have basically the Son of God or Christ and shows up. Basically what it would do is he would replace time, because now he'd be the truth, the way, the light, and he would be the filter of time. I don't mean to ramble too much, but when I was growing up, we were told, being Catholic or Christian, is that the kingdom of heaven is within. Okay, so the whole universe is within you. Imagine that statement is true. The whole universe is within you. The kingdom of heaven is inside of you. Imagine if you tapped into that energy, into that potential. So basically what would happen is one of us would basically bring in the eternal, the infinite, and the timeless, and it would filter through that one person. Okay? And then that would bring basically, if you're religious, you're talking the kingdom of heaven or utopian, but the eternal, the infinite, and the timeless would now be able to enter this dimension. Because right now, this is all a dimension of time. Everything can be measured, everything can be quantified. It's hot, cold, up, down, left, right. I'm happy, I'm sad, I'm hungry, I'm not hungry. Everything we do is a reaction. Everything we do is our experience from the external world. there's a great quote: those who look outside dream, but those who look inside awaken. And that's basically it, is if you go within, you get to the point where yourself would literally dissolve. And in that silence and that stillness where you cease to exist essentially is where all the quantum entanglement would happen. So now going back to your yin and yang symbol over here, basically the father, son, alpha, omega, you can say mother, daughter, beginning and the end. That's essentially it. We live in a conscious universe. Imagine that there's just you and there's just God, and your choice keeps you. You die, you go back, and it's back to oneness. That's the other thing. When I talk about the eternal, infinite, and timeless, and how it can't be quantified, it can only be expressed through oneness. Because if you have two things, now you can count, quantify, and measure, and it's no longer oneness, and it's no longer eternal, infinite, and timeless. So that's why God, being eternal, infinite, and timeless, is only expressed through oneness. And because everything in our universe is measured and quantified, there's 2 points. You have duality or two-ness. That's what keeps us basically separate from the original source. So that's basically the gist of it. What would happen is that one of us would have to create the singularity, which is up over here, collapse all time and space and the whole world to a single point, and then from that point, they would be entangled. Now, I'm not going to go into this too much right now, but for the person that did it, and the point is, it could be any one of us. But while it could be any one of us, it has to be one of us. So it could be a woman, it could be a black woman, and the prophecy would dictate that story, whether the person's white or Middle Eastern or male, whether Muslim, Christian, Asian, black, white, it would entangle itself within the story. And that's the part, is if someone tapped in on that level, because they stepped outside of time and space, and because they kind of found the wrinkle in time, while we're moving through time, that one person their consciousness would have slipped outside of time. And imagine the whole universe or God entangling them with the prophecy and the story, and it all becoming one. So I'm going to leave it there for now. I think another video I'll actually go into an individual and the quantum entanglement and what it would look like, because you have 4 billion people waiting for somebody to show up. And when I've talked to Christians, Catholics, priests, pastors, I've even talked to police officers that are, Christian, Catholic, Jesuit, and I say, if this individual shows up, what's he going to look like? What's he going to say? And how are you going to know it's him? And nobody has an answer. Like some people say, oh, I'll know. But that's just arrogance. At the end of the day, nobody's going to know. At the end of the day, it could be any one of us. So the truth that's in me or in you or in that person, again, it's in all of us. And if you can't see that truth within yourself, and I know it sounds arrogant to say, that you're God or that you're the whole universe, you're both. Okay, because where did you actually come from, and what's the source of you? But it goes so deep, and if you can't see that energy within yourself, you're not going to see it in anyone else. Even if you go to church every Sunday, even if you're a priest, the Pope, and you believe in this stuff your whole life, it's going to pass you by. You're looking at simple words. But imagine there's 8 billion people on the planet right now talking. Imagine one person is speaking the word of God. And if the word created all this, then there's the potential that the word could fix all of this. And I'll leave it at that.